guys, it's Dani. Today we're gonna take a look at and talk about some Dendrobium orchids. This is a very diverse group of orchids, which I do really like, and I do have quite a few of them, but because they're just so different, I feel like I don't really know all that much about them if I take a look at them from above. So this year I decided to focus a little bit on some different types of Dendrobiums, and here I'm not talking about the nobiles, the Phalaenopsis types. As you might know, I do have a few species and I do want to focus myself on some other species as well. Things that I've actually not seen much about on YouTube or Google in general, but I did see them for sale at my favorite vendors. I feel like there are some things that I want to learn, I want to experience, particularly the Australian Dendrobiums. They tend to be what I gravitate towards, but not only. With that said though, let's just talk a little bit about the Dendrobiums that I do have in my collection, tell you a little bit about them and how my experience has been with them, and also talk about what other types of Dendrobiums I'm set on this year. Now, what brought about this video is this little guy right here. This is a Dendrobium baryota with a tag, might I add. This is something my boyfriend got for me. He saw it in the flower shops, didn't know if I had it, he got it, and well, I do have it already. You might have seen it in bloom last month, but it's okay. Now I will keep this one because of the sentimental value, and the other one I shall actually be giving it away. And if you don't know much about the baryota, actually, it is a very popular orchid at the moment. I've seen it in flower shops all the time this year. It is a very windowsill friendly orchid. I have a tutorial on it from quite a few years ago, check it down below. Even though it is a Kingianum hybrid, it doesn't really need all that much winter rest. If you can stop fertilizing during winter time and pipe down a little bit on watering, I think you should be set and you should have no issue flowering this orchid. It's also fragrant. So the Kingianum and other Dendrobiums, which look similar, are on my wish list this year. They're Australian Dendrobiums. I do want to give it another go with the Kingianums. Maybe a different variety than the one that I had, which was kind of finicky for me. I have seen for sale on eBay quite a few Kingianum hybrids with other species. The hybrids looked fantastic. I wanted to buy them, but they were a little expensive. They were an auction. So I didn't, but I do want to get into them this year. I really love this shape of the flower. Alright, so here's one that I have in my collection for quite a long time. I was thinking about doing a story type of video with this guy. This is Dendrobium aphyllum or Pierardi or cucullatum. It goes by all of these names. I'll link it down below to the orchid species article on it. It is a species, so you can definitely learn more about its natural habitat, where it's coming from, and so on. This is not an Australian Dendrobium, and it's also in a different group than the previous one we saw. I think this is in the Dendrobium subgroup. This is a deciduous Dendrobium, which does take a sort of winter rest. Now, I acquired this little guy from an orchid friend back in the day. She had to sell her orchid collection, and I did acquire quite a few orchids. He was just a little baby. And I'll show you how small one of the pseudobulbs actually is in comparison to what we see here. This guy can grow pretty big. It has a pendant nature. There are quite a few Dendrobiums with this growth habit, and it is again one of those Dendrobiums that I really like. And don't worry, there are some groups that I don't really like all that much. I'll talk about them as well, but the pendant Dendrobiums are something I really want to get into this year. So speaking about them, let's just take a look at two more. Here we have some more pendulous deciduous Dendrobiums. This is my Dendrobium Parisi, which I have for a few years now, and this is a new orchid. This is a Dendrobium anosmum. You might remember that I had a anosmum hybrid, but I wasn't very happy with it. It didn't seem to be very vigorous, didn't seem to grow all that big, maybe because of the Cretaceum parentage in it. I don't know. I wasn't very happy with that one. I always wanted a pure anosmum, and now I have it. It's an eBay purchase, and it's fairly recent. Both of these orchids together with the aphyllum or Pierardi, however you want to call that one, they're deciduous Dendrobiums, meaning they do lose their leaves once a year, and that's perfectly fine. Even though it might look scary, it's okay. Typically this happens before they bloom, so it's a reason to get happy actually. and every year they produce a new cane which has to mature within the year. In warm climates such as mine, they do tend to grow bigger theoretically because they have more time at their disposal to actually grow before winter sets in, so I do intend to grow these orchids outside this year. I do have some plants, I do have a setup. Anyway, both of these orchids do take a winter rest, which needs to be slightly cooler, less water, no fertilizer at all, and all of them bloom once a year. These types of dendrobiums I love as well, and I do believe I have the climate for them. In wintertime, I think I need to put them inside my grow space because outside it tends to be a little chilly. It's actually cooler than what articles suggest to give these orchids, so I'm not sure if I'm gonna risk it. I might test it out with one of them at some point because it would be cool to keep them outside all of the time and not have to hassle with bringing them inside, but these are definitely a group of orchids that I do want to get into a little bit more this year and do them a little bit more justice because I have never been particularly fantastic with them. But I think the climate here will actually help me out a little bit. Now, all of those dendrobiums were actually hot growers during summertime, so I can definitely put them outside. But there is a dendrobium in my collection which is very similar to them, takes a winter rest, is deciduous, pendulous, but it's not a hot grower. And this is Dendrobium Lodigesii. You can pronounce it however you want. I heard it pronounced only in German, and in German it's Lodigesii. Sounds good to me, that's how I'm gonna pronounce it. So this is a cold grower. Even though it is deciduous and it does again take that winter rest, it should not be grown in the heat, it appears. Now, I do have this orchid for a little bit over a year. It did pretty okay. I don't like the display, I'm gonna change it. And now I do seem to have a few buds here and there developing, so that's pretty neat. But indeed, there are dendrobiums which are deciduous and pendulous in their growth, which don't like the heat because they're coming from higher elevations or even entirely different geographical locations, even though, as far as I know, this is an Asian dendrobium as well. It just has to do with the elevation, I think. I'll link you down below to the orchid species for all of these orchids because they are species, so we can learn more about their habitat. By the way, the Orchid Species website is a wonderful tool when you want to learn about new species which you've never seen anything about on YouTube or Google or things of the sorts, because you can have an idea of what this orchid experiences in its natural habitat, what elevation it grows in, so you can have an idea if you're dealing with a cooler grower, intermediate, hot grower, and so on. So I do recommend it if you get over the grammar they use, which is special, let's just say that. It's actually a very useful website, so do check the description down below. Anyway, I'm curious to see how this orchid will bloom. It has a sort of a rambling nature, climbing, pendulous. It's a little bit weird, and if you Google pictures with this orchid, you will see it kind of tends to form a clump, but definitely I will think about a basket or something for this guy because this is just not working out. Another group of orchids that I do want to get into this year a lot more, I told you this before, are these guys, which again, I forget the group they belong to. You'll see it on the screen. This is the Lewesi, and this is the Glomeratum cross with Lewesi hybrid. I find them to be absolutely spectacular. The blooms are just wonderful in my opinion. They're very appealing to me. They're not fragrant, but they're not tiny. They have very vivid colors. They're clustered. I just love them, and I do want to have more of these. Now, the Lewesi, which is this guy, is a pretty diverse genus of orchids or species, in the sense that you can have multiple color variations, and I did see on eBay quite a few variations. Some of them are bicolors. They have a really wonderful contrast between red and white. Can you imagine that? I want one of those really bad. These are cooler growers or intermediate growers. However, I discovered that I have absolutely no issues with them in summertime in my growth space. The only issue I had with them was the setup. I have observed that all of the cool growers that I have, they hate LECA, semi-hydro, things of the sorts. It's just not working out for them. So pretty much all of the cool growers that I have, I switched them and they're doing just great in pretty much moss or a combination of moss and bark. These types of orchids are again pendulous, as you can see. They are deciduous to some extent. I think they're what I call semi-deciduous in the sense that they don't really lose their leaves in the first year. They can do so in the second or third year, but eventually they will lose their leaves. I do have them for more than a year, so not all of them have lost their leaves. Hence, I don't believe believe you should expect leaf loss once a year with these guys, but we'll see, experience will tell. Definitely though, it's a group that I absolutely adore, and you can definitely expect more of these from me this year. Obviously, being that they're rather cooler growing, they will not go outside, so they will sit permanently in the grow space. But I mean, there doesn't appear to be any problem with that. Now, so far we looked at dendrobiums which were quite lengthy, quite big orchids, but there are some dendrobiums which are true miniatures. They're really tiny, and here are two of them. This is the Dendrobium Cuthbertsoni, which looks very similar to the Luesi in flower shape, but it belongs to a different group. This is also a cool grower. It has a bit of a bad reputation, but I'm hopeful. I mean, I got away with the other two. Maybe I can get away with this one as well, hopefully, fingers crossed. But this indeed is a test year for me with this orchid. So far in my wintertime, things have gone really smooth. I have quite a few buds developing here, but the orchid was already in pretty good shape when I purchased it. We shall see what happens in the summertime. But if you're in the market for a dendrobium which is tiny and is not a cool growing but rather a hot growing orchid, take a look at the Dendrobium cucumarinum. Now, I'll give it, this has been reclassified to Docrylia, but you will definitely find it under the name Dendrobium quite a lot in orchid nurseries and with the different sellers. To be fairly honest, there is so much reclassifying going on that I fear we shall run out of memory to remember all of these names. So, you know, for me, they're all dendrobiums still. This one is an Australian dendrobium, yet again. However, it doesn't really look like the Kingianum, does it? Well, the name is actually inspired by this orchid's appearance. You can see the leaves look like cucumbers, and they are really adorable. Again, this is a new species for me. I purchased it because of the way it looks like, not the flowers. And in my care it grew this leaf, and now it's growing something there, which could be another pseudobulb and leaf, or maybe a flower, I don't know. I heard these are pretty hard to rebloom, but that's okay because the blooms apparently smell pretty bad. You know what? I'm curious. I actually want to see how bad they smell. Getting back to cool growing Asian dendrobiums, this is Dendrobium harvianum, which again has a bit of a bad reputation, but I seem to do okay with it in my climate, of course indoors, in my grow space. I did actually have issues with it in semi-hydro and LECA. We can see the dieback here on the leaf. But ever since I potted it into organic medium, which has less air pockets, things are looking pretty good now. And here I actually have a little flower spike developing, and I don't think you can see anything. This is a dendrobium that I absolutely adore. It's not looking the greatest. It hasn't really excelled. It has started to grow bigger, as you can see, in the past year, which is good, but ever since I received it about 2 years ago, it was a little bit of a trial and error to figure out what he likes. And semi-hydro was definitely not something he liked, but he's pulling through pretty great right now. And you might notice that on my tag here, I have a snowflake. Well, since dendrobiums are now my strong point, I still have issues remembering which of these species actually needs a winter rest, which doesn't. This one needs a winter rest. Therefore, I created a little snowflake there. Just a visual cue for me to know not to actually water the orchid, because I kind of watered it, I have to say. So you can see it's a little wet, and then I realized, oh wait, I think I should have provided winter rest for this guy, which I didn't, but it's still blooming. So that's okay, no harm done. The roots are still okay. You might actually think, well, Danny, it's easy to know which dendrobiums to not water during winter. Those dendrobiums which don't grow during winter, you should not water, right? No, because here we go, let's go back to the Australian dendrobiums. This is a Latoria type dendrobium, the Dendrobium spectabile. I had this guy in bloom. I love him. Check it down below. It has incredible blooms. Harvianum, I had him in bloom as well. I love that one as well. It's nostalgic to me. I'll link you to videos of these orchids in bloom if I had them in bloom. The spectabile does not require a winter rest, although for me in winter it does not grow, not abundantly anyway. It does not lose its leaves, but also it doesn't create any new growth. However, if I stop watering this guy, he will go shriveled like a raisin and it will hate me. So I've learned my lesson in previous years. I always need to keep this orchid moist. Latorias generally, with maybe a few exceptions, they do need to stay rather moist than dry. I tried this orchid outside, however, and it kinda hated it. Maybe I gave it a little bit too much light, I don't know. I am intending to keep this orchid in the growth space this year. It did great for me in the previous years when it bloomed. Last year he skipped blooming, but I do see a new growth emerging now. There we have it. So he is okay. The Lotorias are a group of dendrobiums that I'm not really into, at least not now anyway. From what I see with other people and on the internet in general, it's not something I think I would like. Which is surprising because the Spectabile is indeed a spectacular orchid in my opinion. The others though, I think there is only one more that I would like to have. I think it's the Atroviolaceum. The others though, I don't know, for whatever reason, they don't appeal to me all that much. However, do check them out, Google them, see what they're all about, because they're very easy to grow as far as I understand. My thoughts on this guy, he is easy to grow provided you give adequate hydration. Other than that, really he's a joy. So the consensus is that these orchids are actually easy to grow in a home windowsill by orchid beginners. So check them out. If you like them, I think you will have pretty good success with them. Getting back to more common views, here is one of the most popular orchids, Dendrobium orchids that is on the market, the Dendrobium phalaenopsis. Here in the back we actually have a hybrid. This is a very common one here in Europe and not only. And in the front we have the species, one of the variations. This is the Dendrobium polarfire and this is the Dendrobium bigibbum. Now, these orchids are called phalaenopsis types because they kind of do resemble phalaenopsis, but they have nothing else in common. They're not related in any way. The group they belong to, though, is called Phalaenontae. So there we have it. We can absolutely call them Dendrobium phalaenopsis, no worries. And they are, again, Australian dendrobiums. See, I think I have a little bias towards them. These orchids, again, are very suited for my climate, which is a very warm climate, not tropical, subtropical, Mediterranean, let's call it. They do seem to enjoy the heat outside a lot, and definitely these guys will go outside yet again because last year it was really a joy growing them outside. Now, these orchids are easily found on the market, and I think most of you know them under different color variations. They're really easy to grow, really forgiving, but they do enjoy their warmth. They also do enjoy very bright light and some direct sunshine as long as the leaves don't overheat. So yet again, they are a really good choice for orchid beginners as long as you can provide the light. They can grow very well under lower light conditions, but they will just not bloom all that well. And with these guys, you want them to bloom well because they are capable of producing a lot of flower spikes. Older pseudobulbs can bloom again. They're not really deciduous, they're called evergreen, but in my experience, they do lose their leaves at some point. It's just not once a year, not even once every 2 years. But they do at some point have bare canes, and that's okay. No need to panic. I know they call them evergreens, but they're not truly evergreens in my experience. So definitely a good orchid to start with if you want to get into dendrobiums, but they're not the only very popular dendrobiums on the market. Equally popular are the Dendrobium nobilis. Now, I don't really have the species to show it to you guys. All that I have are hybrids, but the species itself looks very, very similar. It's actually really similar to this guy. It's really purple. Anyway, back to our little story here. These are really, really easy to grow as well. Vegetatively, at least. The problem with them is that they require a little bit of a winter rest to get them to grow in a normal, let's say, rhythm. And here we're not only talking about blooms, but their growth stages as well. The problem with these guys is they take a lot after what's going on in their environment. If it's warm, they will grow vegetatively. If it gets cold, they will go into blooming mode. Now, I have pretty extended summers and it's warm pretty much most of the year here. I do have cold enough winters to give them the proper winter rest, it's just that the winter doesn't come when it's supposed to come. And autumn is pretty much inexistent here, so they do seem to have some issues with their growth stages. So I'm thinking this year that I will put them outside earlier to stop the new growth from maturing too fast. I still have low temperatures outside, and soon enough these guys will go outside just to maintain that new growth from growing too fast and maturing at the beginning of summer pretty much, because that is what is throwing them off. Long story short, they are easy to grow, but they have a winter rest, and if you don't have some variation between winter and summer, you can actually have a pretty chaotic growth pattern, and in the end it can translate to lesser blooms, even though the orchid will be absolutely fine. But I will try this year a new technique. Other than that, these orchids are also semi-deciduous in the sense that they will lose their leaves after about 2 years since they are produced. So if you see falling leaves, particularly in the autumn and winter on these guys, try not to worry about it because they are supposed to lose their leaves. They do, however, lose the older leaves, not the leaves they created this year, so not these ones. They lose the ones coming from the previous year's growth. That is absolutely normal, and it can be quite dramatic to see, but don't worry, they're supposed to do that. In the end, you will have bare canes on these orchids as well, and it might not be very appealing, but that's how they grow. Now, I do have a few more dendrobiums here and there, but this year I do want to focus a little bit more on them, acquire some species that are pretty rare, at least in the hobby. And the two main groups that I do want to focus on are the Australian dendrobiums, the ones that are related in a way or another with the Kingianum, and also the pendant ones, the Anosmum type, let's call them like that. Along, of course, with new species, new orchid species, which I do want to discover, and it's really, really fun to try out things that nobody actually knows anything about. It is trial and error, yes, but it is the fun of the hobby for me, not only to care for the orchids that I already have, but to discover new species and pretty much challenge myself. So with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this little dendrobium rundown of my collection. And with that said, you know the drill. Like or dislike this video below. Subscribe to my channel for more orchid videos. Also turn on notifications if you don't want to miss any of my videos. And if you really enjoyed this video, consider supporting our channel by visiting the merch store down below. So with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!